Hello, my name is John Sebesta, and I'm the editor of the UN Chronicle, the digital magazine of the United Nations. I'm very pleased to introduce a new segment today. It's called Chronicle Conversations. And this is an opportunity for us to engage directly with UN officials, staff, and other stakeholders, and speak to them about their important work in supporting the United Nations in advancing its ideals and goals. And I'm very pleased to have for our very first session of Chronicle Conversations, Mr. Stefan Schweinfest. Stefan is the director of the UN Statistics Division, which is part of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Stefan, it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming.
Thanks you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, in doing some research for this speech, for this talk, we came across, my staff and I came across a phrase. It's better data, better lives. It sounds like a motto or a vision statement for your division. I wonder if you could elaborate on the meaning of that for you and also for the value of statistics for the United Nations.
Well, thank you, John, first of all, again, for having me here for this first Chronicle conversation. Usually when people hear that I'm a statistician, they run the other direction. But I have had a lot of fun here at the United Nations in my career, and I'm very proud to be serving the United Nations as a director of the Statistics Division. So yes, we work on data from the whole world for the whole world, and we believe strongly that numbers will help us to manage everything better, and we do that in our daily life. I think many of us checked the temperatures today outside or whether it was going to rain. And then based on these kind of numbers, we take decisions whether to take an umbrella or how to dress for the day. And it's not different at the very, very high level. I mean, when policy decisions need to be taken, we need data to understand where a country stands at any point in time with its economic conditions, with its social conditions, and with its environmental conditions. And when you better understand where you are and where you are going with the policies that you are currently implementing, then you will clearly improve the lives of many, many people. If you know where children live, then you know where to build your schools. And if you know the distribution of your population and perhaps particularly vulnerable population, elderly, you will know how health services and hospitals need to be distributed in your country. And so there are many examples how better information, better numbers will clearly lead to better lives for people directly.
Now, would you say, from what you just told me, it sounds like information is your lifeblood there. Would you say that the United Nations is a data-driven organization, and should it be?
Yeah, the answer to the second question clearly is you cannot expect a chief statistician to say that they're not to advocate for my data. No, but I think it is a data-driven organization. If you think back that the Statistical Commission and the Statistics Division were actually created in 1947. So that was really 2 years after the United Nations itself. So there was a very quick realization that if this organization wants to do good work in all of the areas that it is active, whether it is peace and security, mostly perhaps development, but also, I mean, human rights and humanitarian affairs, you need numbers. You need to know where you're standing, who really most needs help, and what is the impact of certain policies that we are implementing, whether we really have progress over time. So I think from the very beginning of the United Nations, there was a realization that data matter, and that's why we have been around for over 70 years now. And it's like every big project in life. I mean, you put a monitoring process in place. I mean, if you start a longer project, a multiple-year project, you want to know where you were at the beginning. You want to be able to monitor as you go along whether you are actually going in the right direction and fast enough in order to reach the objectives. And so you need data. And I think in the most recent example, the big Sustainable Development Agenda that we have right now from 2015 to 2030, it was since the beginning goals, targets, and indicators. So there were the objectives, but you need also the measurement system to know whether with this big project we are actually traveling in the right direction. So I would say definitely it is a data-driven organization, and it better be.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And certainly the people who set that up very early on in 1947 had that foresight, not even thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals, but it certainly works well for today's data-driven metrics that we're using now. Well, I'm also wondering, I know you follow a lot of different variables, and I'm wondering if you just could tell us about one very important variable that's being applied by and for the benefit of all member states.
Yeah, when I read this question, I was thinking, what is something really highly sexy and modern, but sometimes perhaps the most traditional is the most fundamental and most sexy. And that's population. I mean, think about it. We need to know how many human beings are living on this planet, where they are living in the different countries, in the different ecosystems. Or they're living close to a coast, or they're living in a rainforest and in a desert area, and so on and so forth. So since biblical times, we had the population census. So countries do count their population. And the United Nations is known for a program which is the World Census Housing and Population Census Program. So we call, as the United Nations, every 10 years, every country to do a full enumeration of their population. And that will not only give that country the number of people they have, it will give us the regional population, how many people live in Africa. It will give us the global population. And then we can manage the demographic developments. And more modern developments are, of course, that we look exactly where does this population reside. The new census of 2020 will be geo-referenced, so we will have a much better understanding how much is urbanization or how much is rural population. We will get a better understanding of population groups that are particularly vulnerable and need attention: children, the elderly, indigenous people, perhaps disabled populations, and so on and so forth. So the classical numbers of demographic statistics and census is where the United Nations has made a great contribution, not only calling countries to do a census, but also supporting countries to do the census, helping them with technical
build capacity,
build the capacity, and contribute the definitions also, because I mean there are methodological issues. Who is counted in a particular population? How do you count nomad population? How do you count sailors? How do you count people that work in a diplomatic service? So we all need to agree on a certain system so that we don't double count and we don't undercount. And only at the United Nations you can create that framework where this is actually possible. And such a fundamental number of just simply saying how many people are living on this planet and where and under which conditions is really a very important indicator.
And I guess the more refined you get, or the more local you get, the better you can target programs and discover needs for that population and better serve them, I suppose.
That is very much correct. I mean, political decisions are taken at different levels. You have the local decision making, and then municipality has to provide certain services, often health and education, or waste management and something like that. Then you have regional, subnational decisions that are taken, national decisions. We take decisions at the continental level, that there are policies that target the entire Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, certain zones and regions of the world. And then there are global policy decision makings. And for every policy decision, you need a set of numbers, the numbers that are concerned at the local level all the way up to the global level. And our job is in the UN Statistics Division to build that architecture from the very basic local level all the way up to the global level, so that the numbers flow effectively, that they are comparable, that they can be aggregated because they mean the same thing. And that's the beauty of our job.
Sounds like an enormous task, though, getting everyone to agree on what means what.
It is. I mean, the methodological work, we have basically in the Statistics Division 3 fundamental jobs. One is simply the data collection from countries around the world. where we have the various databases that we managed. And second is methodological work, where we agree with countries around the world what means what and how do we count, so that we can actually compare the numbers, not only between countries, but also over time. It's very important that we keep our methodological systems constant so that we can manage to see how development is actually happening or not happening, because if you change the definition every year, you would not know what actually happened from one year to the next. And then the third big area is capacity building, because once we have defined a methodology, we don't leave the countries alone and just say, we send you a big book with many complicated definitions and now you have to implement that. No, we have rather us and the UN system and partners in the World Bank and other international organizations. We work together to help countries to strengthen their national statistical systems, which is really one of the most exciting parts of my job here at the UN.
It's fascinating. I didn't know it was that detailed. It went to that level of locality. I know that you just finished an enormous task, which is producing the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2019.
Yes.
And I think this is an annual report that you've been doing. It dates back even to the MDGs you were telling me earlier.
It did, as does.
So I'm wondering if you could tell us about the purpose of this report and your division's role in putting it together.
Yeah, no, I had to bring our baby. This is really the proud piece of the work of our division. It's the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2019. It is the tip of the iceberg, because I mean, underneath this report, which is a summary report, it's organized by the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Agenda, and it gives a rather global summary by regions of the world. How are we doing in education, in health, in food, in poverty, and all of this. So this is a bit, as I said, the tip of the iceberg, but underneath lies a very detailed database which has over 230 indicators for 193 countries around the world. And of course, this is a really classical example of UN teamwork, because the entire UN system works together. We have our friends and colleagues from UNESCO and the specialized agencies, FAO, ILO, WHO, working with us in their subject matter areas and reviewing with us the data that come from countries. That's also very important, that the original data are actually coming from the countries themselves. They are reported by the national statistical systems, and it is important that the countries own that information, because if they don't own that information, they will not act upon it. If that information came from some global estimate and countries would dispute it, then we will not have any kind of awareness or policy decision making. So this is a very complex process where national statistical officers and UN system statistical experts work together. There are probably easily like 200-300 people who are involved in a one-year process of collecting all of this information, and there's a huge database on our website. And then of course this is the glossy report where we draw some of the key conclusions at the global level to guide the global discussion, to answer basically two questions when you look at the development agenda. Which are the areas that may be possibly falling behind? Are there any specific development agenda elements that need more attention? And the second question is, which countries are falling behind? And that may be individual countries, or it's very often types of countries. It could be a region of the world, like Sub-Saharan Africa clearly has a number of challenges, but it could be also a group like the SIDS, the Small Island Development States, that by the nature of their geography and their size have certain challenges that they have to battle with. And this report at the global level tries to highlight where we as a global community perhaps should put our attention.
That's interesting. I know that you don't go into deep analytical processes here, and that you don't offer direct, concrete recommendations to member states, for example. But I wonder, there must be a couple of important findings that the report, that will bubble up from the report. I wonder if you could share them with us. Yeah.
Oh, certainly. I mean, as you rightly said, our job is not to make policy recommendations. I mean, there are there's the whole policy expert community in the United Nations with whom we work very closely. But we draw the line with a sort of a descriptive study of the world as it is right now. And as we do this consistently over time, and you said this report goes back to the MDG period, so we have had now almost 20 years of experience with this type of reporting, you can see some big lines. And the things that this report highlights is we are a little bit worried that we have made tremendous progress in a number of areas, like poverty levels have really gone down, child mortality, immunization has been greatly successful, and it can be shown that certain diseases have certainly critically decreased, and even access to energy and so worldwide has increased. But there are two big topics, namely climate change and inequality. Inequality between countries and inequality within a certain country between certain social groups, in particular vulnerable groups, that threaten some of those advances. So I think we need to pay attention. This is one of the messages of this 2019 report, that these are two big topics that we need to keep focusing on. And of course, in particular in the environmental area, I mean, there are some alarming data that we're having in the areas of biodiversity, because there are a number of up to 1 million species and plants that are threatened by extinctions. And so these are also data that, as I said, this is the Sustainable Development Goals report, so it has an economic, social and environmental dimension. So we are looking at all of this, and these are some of the key messages that are contained in this year's report.
What's interesting about the two findings you just talked about is that they affect equally, I think, developed and developing countries. So it's not any one region that needs to take responsibility for this, but it's really a global issue that affects every country, it seems.
That is very true, and I mean the big difference also between the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Millennium Goals that were sometimes interpreted, perhaps misinterpreted, as a developing country agenda. I think the big change in 2015 was the universality of the agenda, that all countries made a commitment that they are equally, we are all in the same boat. I mean, and as you rightly say, issues like climate change and even challenges of inequality, there cannot be a dividing line between developed and developing countries. These are really issues that concern us all as a global community, and this is why the United Nations is the right place to look at these issues and address them.
It's the only place, probably, to look at all of these issues simultaneously. We don't have a lot more time left, but you mentioned earlier that sometimes when someone starts to hear about statistics, they run in the other direction. You clearly love what you're doing, and you enjoy your work. I wonder if just briefly you could tell us how you got into statistics and how you came to work for the statistics division.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I would not have been here for 30 years, and I will be here 30 years next month, if I didn't like what I'm doing. I was one of those strange, nerdy child that was good in languages and mathematics. So I mean, so they said, "What do you do with that?" And then somebody at university had the idea and saying, "Why don't you want to work in global statistics or something like that?" And I thought, "Oh, that sounds interesting," and it allows me to travel, which is also something I like to do.
Great.
So over the years, I've had the extraordinary privilege of visiting many countries and many statistical offices around the world, and I have the greatest respect of the professional community, because I think that's one of the biggest elements of fun in my job, that I feel I'm a member of a global community, because there are statisticians in all countries, in developed and developing countries. And especially in developing countries, they sometimes work under very difficult conditions in order, where the data is needed most, in order to help the politicians to make good decisions for the people, it's sometimes, for obvious reasons, the most difficult to compile those data. So I've had the pleasure of meeting some really great people in my life, and that's why I wouldn't leave that job for anything else.
Well, that's a great answer, and I hope that your comments inspire some budding statisticians out there that the UN needs and the world needs. So that's great. Thank you very much.
That would be great. That would be great pleasure for me to learn that.
Yeah, I don't know how you figured that out. There must be a statistic on that too. So that's about all we have time for today, but I wanted to let everyone know that if you'd like more information about the Statistics Division and its work, you can check their website at unstats.un.org. So on behalf of the Publications and Editorial section with DGC, with which I work, I'd like to thank our colleagues at UNTV for providing this very professional setting for us to speak in today. And also a huge thank you to Stefan Schweinfest. Thanks for coming. I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us today, and I think everyone's going to enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also everyone out there for joining us today, thank you very much. For the UN Chronicle and Chronicle Conversations, I'm John Sebesta. Take care.